Hello and welcome to this session on craft and symbolism. The session will focus primarily on Year 9 but can be applicable to other year groups as well. If we consider some of the key symbols that students have encountered within their poetry collection this term and the symbols that they will encounter when they move on to Macbeth and Christmas Carol, it sort of makes sense that we use that fantastic analytical work on symbolism and now place it into creative writing. So I think as a point of reference, I would always start with the fact that they've already encountered these symbols. So for instance, if we looked at the symbol of blood, that's a recurring symbol, not just in Macbeth, but equally within their poetry collection. If we thought about the way that that symbol is used to help signify a wider or more deepened meaning of a particular character or concept within the text, then it's a really useful tool to use. And I think using that as a point of reference that you have encountered these motifs or symbols in their literature texts is a great way to say that you know what the best writers use these methods, and it's a good opportunity for us to use these methods in our own writing to help signify deeper meanings. For symbolism to be effective in their writing, they need to plan for it, they need to understand where that symbol is going to pop up in their response and the intent behind it. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's good to use those earlier examples in the literature texts as a point of reference. So if we looked at remains and the use of the symbol of blood, the wider connotations of that symbol is that the speaker is stained by guilt, they've been marked by it, it's fixed, it's immovable, and they feel that burden with them all the time. Again, if we talked about that in London, for instance, they would talk about the idea of sacrifice and the soldier's sacrifice in the name of king and country. So just using that as a point of reference, demonstrating that the symbol can't just be a repeated reference. Otherwise, that just becomes a bit arbitrary. There needs to be a deeper meaning, and we need to think about the tone that we're writing within, the main idea behind our writing, and to select a symbol that supports that. So on this slide, I've got a really simple planning grid, and it's just a way of demonstrating that there are 6 sections to our structure, and just identifying where this symbol would pop up and why it would pop up at that point. So I'm looking at the image here, and the key detail for me would be the lamppost or the light. So I'm probably going to use that as a symbol, but I could be far more creative about that symbol. So I could maybe think about the negative connotations of light, and I might start thinking about how the light seems to be a bit strained or strangled maybe. And then if I want to transition and maybe think about the more positive connotations of that symbol, it could be a reference to hope. So I'm thinking about the intent. It seems to be the key symbol of the text or the image. So I'm going to think about the wider meaning of it. So it could be at the beginning of my response, I'm going to concentrate on the lack of hope in society, and then the end of the response, there being greater hope or more improved hope, I suppose. Once students have identified the intent behind their symbol, it's about providing the words to be able to describe it within their response. So I think a really quick activity of just placing their words on a scale can help them to do that. So for instance, if we were thinking about light as being drained or diluted, and we're talking about near darkness, we would need to select words that reference light in that particular way. And then we could think about how those references build towards an illumination. So if that was at the end point, the absolute opposite of where we started, then those words in the middle become really significant, don't they? Because they begin to demonstrate a slight transition. And what's particularly useful by doing that exercise is it almost mirrors, or is more, I think, more likely to be an extension actually of the work that they've done in Year 7 and Year 8, where they've discussed why that word. So they're thinking about those subtle differences in meaning between these words. And once they've kind of like worked out their scale of like near darkness to total illumination, they can then become quite clever about where they're going to apply this. So it could be that they wanted to mirror the lighting to the development of the character. So it could be that the character at the beginning of their response starts off quite weakened. Perhaps they've been caught in a sort of rainstorm, I don't know, but they feel weakened at this point. And then as the response progresses, the character becomes increasingly strengthened. And light could perhaps reflect that development also. I think what's really key here, though, is that we don't have dramatic changes in light or a dramatic change in the character or even another symbol, because that seems a bit unrealistic. It's the subtle or gradual transition that's really key here. And I think those words that students place in the middle of their scale become increasingly important. It's perhaps a bit unrealistic to say that we were drowning in darkness and now we are bathed in light. It could be something as simple as that faint glimmer strengthening into a beam, or the break of a new day. That's probably a more realistic transition between the two. And I think in the summer 2023 examiner report, they were quite wary about these dramatic transitions that seemed unrealistic when students were crafting their writing. It doesn't always have to be about light. I know that's quite a simple way of getting in symbolism into the response, but equally sound can be. And I think that dexterity of demonstrating there are more than one symbol that you could use is a really good opportunity to kind of show students that we can craft different symbols and give them greater exposure to a range of symbols. The image might not afford them an opportunity to discuss light. It just so happened that we had a lamppost in that particular image. They could be given an image of a stormy sea, and they have to rely on something different at that point. It's about allowing the image to almost dictate what they could select. And I think sound symbolism is a really applicable symbol as well. So it could be that you ask the students to think about how that the sound was almost muted, or it was a slight murmur, and then it could develop or progress to something far more louder, maybe the idea of it being blaring or a roar, for instance. What's really good about this particular symbol is that I think the light symbolism invites students just to focus upon the negative quite quickly in their response, and the image might not invite that from the candidate. So by using sound symbolism, you could talk about the ferocity of sound, about the marketplace, for instance, being a cacophony of sound, and then the character seeking solitude, of wanting peace and wanting quiet. And that's a nice reversal of that structure as well. So it's always a really good symbol, I think, to sort of teach the reverse. It could be that you present quite a positive description of the scene first and then transition into a slightly more negative one, that they were now isolated, and that sound symbolism reflecting their isolation in that particular scene as well. So here's an example from an opening paragraph that's related to that earlier image of the lamppost. And you can see that light symbolism is used pretty much within the opening of that paragraph. So you've got the reference to the meagre glow, the greedy darkness that seemed to swallow the amber glow whole, and the idea of light being drained really gives a sense that this is a hopeless atmosphere, and we can kind of create that tone quite quickly. You could have definitely have used the sound symbolism. You could have started off with it being very quiet and quite isolated if you want to start off in quite a negative tone, but equally you could have had a cacophony of noise at that point. But it's just a way of demonstrating that it's not the case, but being one reference in the text, that actually there are lots of kind of miniature references that are spread across the paragraph that really refer to this symbol and the idea of light being devoured and there being no hope within this setting. This paragraph's towards the end of that response, so again we have the inversion of the symbol, and I wanted to really concentrate on how gradual that transition is. So we've got a breaking of a new day. That's a bit of a frame reference. We would expect to see greater light in this scene now. It's not just that they've imagined this illuminous scene before them, but it's now feasible that there would be an increase in the light. So that reference of just suggesting that the breaking of a new day, or there is a sunrise at this point, makes it almost credible that we are going to see an increase in light. And then towards the end of the paragraph, we've got references back to the amber glow, but notice now it's a ball of amber ascending. Again, we're not talking about it illuminating the skyline, but we are discussing a slight increase in light because it corresponds to the breaking of a new day. And that means that the horizon is now bathed in light, and then that reference to hope all the way through. I hope that's been useful. I hope it's given you some food for thought about how to kind of allow students an opportunity to develop symbols and to have greater ownership over the symbolism that they use within their writing. As ever, please just touch base with your link director and I'll be happy to go through this with you as well.